Greetings, you curiouser and curiouser Herle Burly-ites. You know, there's only one provincial premier in this country that has bucked the electoral trend since COVID, which is to say, not lost the election or eked out a tiny margin of victory or just managed to retain a majority with a vastly diminished number of seats. That premier, and former Herle Burly guest, is Tim Houston of Nova Scotia, who this week increased his majority from 34 to 43 seats out of 55, crushing the Liberals and making the NDP the new official opposition in the process. Premier Houston is one of one. Today we're talking to the leaders and architects of the campaign that helped him do it. A dream team victory lap, as it were. Cameron MacKeen, Tara Miller, and James Mitchener join us today. A few very brief biographical notes. Cameron MacKeen served as Premier Houston's campaign co-chair for both the 2021 and 2024 elections. He's a managing lawyer with Nova Scotia Legal Aid and a former legislative reporter at the Chronicle Herald. Tara Miller served as co-chair for the 2024 election. She's been recognized by Best Lawyers in Canada for 3 years running and is a partner and the M in MDW Law. James Mitchener was campaign manager in both the 2021 and 2024 elections. He's currently Premier Houston's Director of Operations and Strategic Relations. I'm going to talk to them about the whole goddamn successful story today. The only incumbent government to increase their margin of seats and votes in a high inflation period. How did they do it? The risk-reward calculus for going early, the core strategies, the federal Liberal wedge and why it was so effective, and more. James, Tara, and Cameron, welcome to the Herle Burly.
Just want to make one minor correction. Tara was involved in 2021 as well. She was also
excellent. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, she was obviously the co-chair then too.
Hey.
Okay.
Thanks
Excellent.
for having us.
Yeah, it's great. It's awesome.
Well, congratulations to all of you. That was a big deal. You must have been having a good week so far.
It's been a good week.
Yeah. I've won and I've lost. And the days after the election when you win are like way better than the days after the election when you lose.
I would say we had a really fun campaign sort of night out on Thursday. And it was a really, we're all slowly recovering from that. We're all still slowly recovering. It was a fun time, but it was not just the three of us, but a lot of other people that were involved in the campaign. So it's a good way. And then Tuesday night was also a lot of fun as well. So we're just slowly getting in back of the swing of things.
Yeah. We did, David, on Tuesday night. We went a little bit later. Obviously, we were waiting to see some of those really tight races. There were about 4 of them, and Elections Nova Scotia stopped counting and said, we'll come back to this in the morning. And there were a bunch of us still at the Pictou County Wellness Center, and we ended up taking a bus ride in the bus, the campaign bus, to deliver someone home safely. And that was actually a pretty fun sort of bonding moment for those of us, because most of us had not spent any real time in that bus, right? So driving around Pictou County, singing songs with the premier, and it was a super fun way to end that night for sure.
None of you
the songs. Go ahead. "We Are the Champions" was played a fair amount.
I bet. Good old Freddie gave us a anthem for all of our victories. None of you ever were on the bus at any point in time?
Not really.
A day here and there.
Yeah. I went on for 5 minutes to make sure there were throat lozenges at one point. That was it. And then I think in 221, Cameron and I took a bus ride from headquarters down the street to the Chamber of Commerce debate. That was it. So we were embedded, the three of us, in headquarters.
I think the last 3 days of the 2014 Ontario provincial campaign, I went on the bus just to get myself out of the headquarters because there were no more decisions for me to make. And I was only just pacing around bothering people who were doing actual work. So
I can relate to that. We can relate to that. It was like, how much junk food is still left in the campaign headquarters that I can continue to eat and not feel guilty about, because my diet was supposed to go away for the month of the campaign. So that was a lot of that being done the last couple of days.
So can I ask you, did you have discrete areas of responsibility between the three of you? Are there things that each of you had sort of focused on in the campaign? Cameron?
I'd say, Tara and I sort of saw everything, and I'd say we both I would say Tara would be more of a detailed person than I, but I'd say the two of us basically shared everything. Mitch would have been was in charge of our sort of ground game. So Mitch was sort of like the data guy, like making sure where like the seats and our get out to vote, and he had a team as well. So it was sort of like, but I mean, it was just, I think the best thing along with this campaign and 2021, it was just everybody sort of was working together. And so there wasn't any sort of like issues with who's doing what, or, you know what I mean, along those lines.
Well, you've all been together for 2 elections, so you're a tight team now, right? And you've established your working relationships and trust and all those things that can make a campaign go bad if you don't have them.
Yeah. Lots of collaboration, lots of muscle memory from having done it a few times.
And we all had experience losing campaigns, not necessarily in these roles, but we'd experienced that in previous campaigns. So we weren't, sometimes you have to lose a couple times before you win. So we'd all experienced that before as well.
Yeah. So I don't hear from all of you on this, but maybe I'll start with you, Tara. What would you say were the fundamental keys to the victory?
I would say there were 2 key things. Really key to it was, of course, our leader. Tim Houston and his brand and his relatability and his authenticity. He has established himself as a tremendously hard worker who moves fast to get things done. And people really respect him for that. In 221, he said, listen, we're inheriting a system that has had some, deterioration. We have a plan. This is going to take time. In 221, the focus, of course, as you know, David, was healthcare. This is going to take time, but we have a plan. And he established the trust of Nova Scotians because they saw that over the course of the last 3.5 years, he worked so hard to execute on that plan. They didn't blame him for the residual things in the system, the voters of Nova Scotia. And we were able to take that forward into 224 with him saying, like, the plan is working. Let's continue to execute on the plan. On the doorstep, I don't think any of us have ever worked with a leader who has door knocked or made door knocking the priority. He was out on the doors every day, David, knocking, except for Remembrance Day and the 2 days there were a debate. Every day. He door knocked on more doors.
So you built door knocking into his schedule during the writ.
100%. Sure. And that's what he wants to do, right? So that gets him right in front of Nova Scotians. And they love that. The Premier's at their door, not just on an off day, that's consistently what he did from corner to corner to coast of the province. And he's, very sort of human about his failings. Like, I don't always get things right, but I will listen and I will respond. And I think that, in and of itself makes him really, really likable, really authentic. And he translates well for the voters of Nova Scotia who trust in him and they see him delivering as well. So there was that. And of course, we came out of 221 with the focus on healthcare. The focus this time was broader than that. Times are tough, inflation, affordability, housing. And what he's done, and James can speak to this too, having been, in the Premier's office and that whole group with the cabinet and caucus, they've laid the foundation for plans on housing and affordability. And so we didn't just start during the 30-day writ period. Again, there was credibility that had been established by all the work that had been done by that tremendous team in the House. And so we were able to continue to build on that legacy and that deliverance of promises from before.
Cool. Thank you, Tara. James, do you see anything different? Anything additional?
Just to echo some of the things that Tara said, like Tim Houston really is an elite level retail politician. Like he wants to be on the doors and we send him into tough areas. Like it's not just a data collection exercise with him. He is persuading door by door Nova Scotians to vote for him. And one thing we did find is that people really gave him a lot of credit for the effort he was putting in. He had some successes and had some challenges and times where he had to sort of reverse course on a couple of things, but people really appreciated that he was trying a lot of things and trying really hard to fix what he found when he got into office.
Yeah. Cameron, did anything happen in the campaign that you weren't expecting?
I guess, what I wasn't expecting to an extent is we did, because of frankly, people are very happy with the job the Premier was doing. But I did expect, because we were starting out with a pretty big lead, I expected as the things got closer to election day, our lead might very well get smaller, but it actually got bigger.
Right.
And it actually, like, we were literally seeing
Got a
more
theory?
momentum. I think a couple things. I think a couple things. I think the debates were really good for the premier. I think he actually came across as sort of a statesman, as a premier. The other two leaders were constantly going after him, but he sort of rose above the fray. And I think that looked really good on him. And he was calm, composed. He said you can't do everything. So I think we saw that. And I think there had been established as well, sort of what James had said earlier, that people weren't blaming us for what happened, because a lot of these things were outside of Nova Scotia's realm, because it's their national problems, but saw that we were doing stuff that should have been done 10, 20, 30 years ago, and we were getting credit for it. So that, I think that was something that as people, even as they focused more on the election, that they began to, like, they agreed with more and more.
Right. Tara, Cameron mentioned the leaders' debate. Do you think it was important? And I had heard I didn't see the debate, but the reports I read said the NDP leader did quite well in the debate.
So a couple things on that, David. Back in 2019, which is when Cameron and I and James Mitchener started working on that eventual campaign in 221, I'll never forget, we had a meeting early on with some advisor, consultant who was giving us some advice, and they said that there was a survey done. I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but basically said that, like, Canadians spend about 7 minutes a week, and that might have actually been high, 7 minutes a week, thinking about municipal, provincial, and federal politics. And certainly for all of us in the room, we were like, what? How's that possible? Given that
we think about it all the time. We can't stop thinking about it.
Anyway, that never left me. It's always stuck with me, right? And I think that is why the debates are so important, because there are milestones in any campaign, of course, and that's when Nova Scotians will tune in, and they did tune in. And to exactly what Cameron said, the premier was fabulous. He was prepared. He was calm. He was measured. He spoke to Nova Scotians. The NDP leader, she's a lawyer, right? So that lawyer by trade. She hasn't practiced in a while, but she is accustomed to being on her feet as a lawyer and being an advocate. So she did. She spoke to her base and did that well, I think. But in terms of overall the debate presentation, both in the CBC and the CTV debate, Tim Houston was consistently on point, on message, and doing what he does best, speaking to and resonating with Nova Scotians.
And we saw it in our internal polling, how, that things got better, especially after the CBC debate. And things are always good. I want to be clear. It wasn't like this was a campaign that we didn't start off with in good shape. But after, and also after the CTV debate, like, things got better. Our polling afterwards was improved. So I think that certainly was an indicator.
I want to be as direct as possible with this one. It's an accepted truth that more competition in a marketplace brings greater benefits to the end consumer, because the natural outflows of said competition are more innovation, better products, and prices. In short, more customer value. Well, Herle Burly-ites, there's a very real possibility that when it comes to Canadians having the right to choose their internet provider, some large carriers, i.e. the red logos and the blue logos, are trying to drastically limit the competitive set. It's a complicated tale, as these things tend to be, but the short story is this. In 2023, there was a CRTC interim decision to allow competitors like our presenting sponsor TELUS to offer wholesale internet services as a new provider in Ontario and Quebec. The CRTC confirmed this decision in a final ruling in August, primarily to lower prices. TELUS, as you can imagine, jumped right in, actively investing in the markets, innovating their product bundles and services, offering customers more choice and flexibility, and here's the key thing, generating thousands of eager signups. A pause here to recap. After an in-depth 17-month process and mountains of expert evidence, the CRTC recognized a huge need, mandated more competition, and TELUS brought it. Cut to today. A federal cabinet order is now asking the CRTC to revisit their original decision and seriously consider limiting the competitors who can operate in only 90 days, blocking TELUS from bringing competition and its consumer benefits to Ontario and Quebec. A flip-flop, a large and damaging one. I just want to leave you with this for now. TELUS may be sponsoring this message, but it's about something bigger than them. Protecting fair competition and ensuring all Canadians have the right to choose more affordable internet and better service bundles. If you feel similarly about the benefits of competition and not wanting them stymied, you can make your voice heard by signing a petition at change.org/yourinternet.yourchoice.
But one thing I always find interesting about the campaign, though, is like the talk about the NDP is, they picked up 3 seats, but they didn't even go up in 1% in the popular vote. So
Right.
I think that's, I mean, don't get me wrong, it was a strategic campaign, but Liberals still won the popular vote over the NDP, right? So it wasn't like there was this big surge towards the NDP. It was a Liberal collapse, which we got basically all the Liberal support, and they, strategically ran in a few ridings and picked up, but their popular vote didn't even go up a point. So it wasn't, and so it wasn't like some.
No, that's a really good point. Yeah, it's a really good point. Now, I hope Cameron and Tara, I hope you don't mind if I just drill James for a couple of seconds on some tactical considerations.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, how did you spend your money?
We put a lot of money into voter identification and GOTV. I mean, November in Nova Scotia is not always the most favorable time to be out on the doors. It can be cold and rainy, but we found phone banking for that voter ID to be really key to helping build up the data that we needed in order to win the election.
And just to stop you, just for old folks like me, you can't ID the vote with volunteers anymore, can you? You have to pay
really
phone banking.
No, we talk a lot about people-less campaigns and what that looks like going forward, because to hit the number of doors, to talk to the number of people that you need to talk to, you really do need to have some sort of professional phone banking to help you.
Yeah. Okay, so you put a lot of money into that.
Yeah.
What about advertising?
I mean, yes, we did put a lot of money in advertising, and Cam and Tara really saw more of the advertising side of it than I did. But a lot of money went into social, a lot of money went into broadcast, and we had a pretty robust out-of-home campaign through HRM that I think was very helpful.
Yeah. And that was a difference to this campaign, David, in terms of the media buys. Like, we put a lot more money into the social media component than we did in 221. I think that's just an inevitable reality.
At the expense of broadcast?
No, we were able to increase both things, but way more percentage-wise, I would say, into the social media piece than we had ever done before. And again, I think that that's just where we are in terms of, how people consume and you can connect with people. We also have the benefit of a really exceptional sort of in-house media team led by a very talented young man, Jake Manning, and he was with us in 221, which allows us to produce things very quickly. Now, there were a lot.
He was on the bus. He was on the bus the whole time.
Yeah.
And making the creative for the digital.
Making the creative. Yeah. On the road, real time, with a team as well in the war room.
We all got to learn from each other, I guess, in 2021. And Sam Foran was obviously the guy that was sort of in the headquarters helping with the sort of the digital, but there was so much less preparation we had to do this time than last time, because we had so many people that we were already were confident in their jobs. So it was very seamless that way. And it was just really, a lot of us, like James and I and Tara, knew each other, but a lot of us sort of like some of the other members of the campaign, we didn't really know that well in 2021. Now they're kind of like family, right? So we're all, doing this together, and we all sort of know each other's ebbs and flows. So it's quite good that way.
You didn't mention print advertising, and I was going to ask you kind of a dull question about print advertising, and then I thought of a more interesting question, which is, really, is there any media left in Nova Scotia? Like, who covered the election campaign?
I do have to interrupt about print advertising. It was the one thing that Tara and I used to disagree on. It was the only thing. And I used to be a newspaper reporter, but that was That was our thing, wasn't it, Tara?
It was, yeah. We had one arm wrestle, and that was in 221, and it was about the newspaper spend, and Cameron was a no, and I was a yes, and he left the room, and I overruled him. Based on the fact my sample group being my parents, who read the paper every single day. So we did have, of course, we did have some print stuff, but it was not a big part of our campaign.
But what print is there anymore? Is there a Chronicle Herald?
There is.
There is, but it's
Yeah.
it's not. Yeah, no, you have about 3 or 4 reporters that cover the legislature, cover politics on a regular basis in Nova Scotia.
Were they on your bus?
No, they would just basically, all of them Premier would usually do an event at headquarters every day. Then he'd go off and knock on doors and maybe, travel outside HRM, sometimes do like overnights, but they would be at the headquarters for probably 15 or 20 minutes, hear what the Premier was saying, then go to Liberal headquarters or NDP headquarters. So it wasn't, it's quite a difference from when I was covering the legislature for the Herald in the 1999, 2000 sort of area. It's very, so you have to basically, you really can't do too much out of HRM because you're not going to get coverage if you don't do it.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're out in Yarmouth, nobody's with you.
No. Yep.
No.
So to Cameron's point, David, one of the things we did in 221, which is primarily because of COVID, but we created a media room in our headquarters. That just makes it a lot easier for folks to know where they're going. They're not chasing us around the province with depleted resources. And we did that again in 224. Works really well to have that space where people know where they're going and do our process of it.
You know what you're saying, Tara? We're witnessing the end of leaders' tours.
Mm.
We are witnessing, I don't think campaigns are going to continue to be structured around leaders' tours at any level anymore because there aren't enough media to follow them. They just don't make sense, right? For all the reasons you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I would say other than the door knocking, there was but a handful of events that we did over the course of the campaign. It was all our daily policy announcement and then door knocking with a couple of rallies.
Right.
And
okay.
The work and the prep would be like what ridings he would go to, which would certainly, but the actual having to stage stuff. Yeah, no, it's true.
So let's see how I can put this diplomatically. Canada-US relations will probably soon evolve. There. How's that? And the Canadian-American Business Council will be in the middle of it all. The Council has for decades represented the concerns of, as you'd expect, Canadian and American businesses that sell and buy across our common border. And that's a great deal of business indeed. About $900 billion US annually, or 1.4 trillion Canadian. Last week, the Council held its annual gala in Ottawa. It's a hot ticket. I couldn't get one. The usual slew of cabinet ministers and CEOs and consultants and other bold-faced names who constitute Ottawa celebrity were in the crowd. So was our ambassador to the United States, Kirsten Hillman, and her counterpart, U.S. Ambassador David Cohen, who, given the realities of political appointments, won't be ambassador much longer. His message, though, was calming. Yes, he said, change and adjustment brings nervousness, but he pointed to more than 100 years of peace and uninterrupted trade and basically told people to be cool. Everything will be fine. Which was nice to hear. The most sparkling figure of the evening was Martin Short, without doubt one of Canada's most valuable exports to the U.S. And he was sassy. Among other things, he told the crowd that his famous relationship with Steve Martin is more or less the same as Donald Trump's relationship to Elon Musk, but, quote, without the sexual tension. I mean, we can all use a laugh these days, right? I should say here that our sponsor, CN, is a prominent member of the Canadian-American Business Council. CN does more cross-border business than most and believes in the Council's mission and agrees with Ambassador Cohen. Pundits can talk about disruption all they want, but the mutual interest of Canada and the U.S. is and always will be smooth, rules-based trade. It has to be. A continent's way of life depends on it. All right, so now we've had our victory lap. Now I'm going to ask you some tougher questions. The early call. You yourselves brought in a fixed election date.
Yep.
Right? And then you violated that fixed election date. For reasons that sitting here in Toronto looked pretty transparent. You wanted to run while Trudeau was still the Prime Minister. And that makes a lot of sense to me, and Doug Ford's going to do the same thing. in Ontario. Why wasn't there a backlash about that? Normally, early election calls, the general principle seems to be that you can get away with them if you've got a very good reason for seeking a new mandate. But if it looks like you're just doing it to advance your own interests, that voters will often punish you. So why didn't you get punished?
I think because people really like what the direction the Premier was taking the province. And sure, there were some people that raised that issue at the doors, but was that an issue that someone was going to go into a ballot and mark the ballot based on? Because the more important thing for Nova Scotians was to have Premier Tim Houston continue to stay in office. And I hear what you're saying, but there's also a risk in doing that too, right? So I think there's you still had 7 or 8 months to govern, but you're basically giving up your job early to let the public decide. So I think that was sort of the pushback on it. But I mean, obviously, Nova Scotians supported him stronger than they did in 2021. So I don't think it certainly didn't hurt us. That's for sure.
Right. But you must have worried about it.
Well,
Yep.
Our job, but our job, Cameron and I said to the Premier, we will be ready to go when you're ready to go,
Right.
And that was our primary focus, just make sure that we had the pieces in place. Yeah.
And there had been enough early election speculation through the summer that we were able to sort of see that Nova Scotians weren't going to be overly turned off by an early election.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, what if I had been in your shoes, another thing I would have worried about is the fact that you ran such an exceptional campaign in 2021 and a highly unusual campaign for a conservative-leaning party, which is you focused almost exclusively on healthcare and promised a major investment in healthcare and promised, obviously, major improvements in healthcare. So if I'm preparing for this show and I Google Nova Scotia healthcare, I'm going to get a litany of people who don't have a family doctor, who waited too long for a procedure, and all kinds of stories about problems in the Nova Scotia healthcare system. So obviously, it's not, quotes, fixed, right? Yet you didn't really even feel a need to deal with that in this election campaign, per se. What happened there? How did you, it feels to me like you got away with something.
I think the fact is that people saw us making progress.
Yeah.
They saw us making progress. They were looking at things. Geez, if for example, if the Liberals or the NDP 10 or 15 years ago had opened up a medical school in Cape Breton where the graduates were all going to become family doctors in rural Nova Scotia, wow, that would have actually been helping things now. Those are the kind of things. It was sort of like we're fixing stuff that should have been done years ago. We're doing it. It's going to have benefits down the road, and I think people bought that. I mean, because it's true. I mean, if Stephen McNeil in his first mandate said he was going to open up a medical school in Cape Breton, there'd be graduates coming out right now. There'd be 30 or 40 graduates, family doctors, which can make a big difference in Nova Scotia, having 30 or 40 extra family doctors coming out every year, and people realize that we're doing stuff that probably should have been done earlier.
And Tim Houston was very candid with Nova Scotians, David, in 221. He said, this is going to take some time and it's going to get worse before it gets better because we have to start to clean things up and get visibility over what needs to be done. And again, to his brand and relatability, people believe and trusted and have seen progress in those pieces. Took a long time to get clarity over what the actual doctors list is, and that list is coming down and continue to come down finally through the campaign with all of the collective efforts that have been taking place over the last 3 years.
David, you probably find this. I'm not going to give the person's name, but in the lead up to the 2021 election, we were looking to try and get some other polling done sort of on issues, and I won't say the person's name, but I was talking to him. This would have been 2 or 3 months before the election was called, and I was talking to him, and because he was looking at the polls that were showing us 30 points behind and stuff. And he goes, so what are you guys just trying to save the furniture? And I was going, well, no, I think we can pick up seats. And then he goes, well, what are you guys running on? And I go, we're running on healthcare. And he goes, well, Tories can't run in healthcare. So I was like, okay, I guess this guy's not going to be our pollster. And it was just sort of, I was just like, okay, all right, I guess this isn't going to work. So
yeah. And I think with the McNeil and Rankin governments that had been in before, there was a feeling amongst Nova Scotians that wasn't their focus. And when it became Premier Houston's focus, even though the results have been slow, as he said they might be. I think they do appreciate that it has been the almost singular focus over the 3.5 years of the first term.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you read the low turnout? Satisfaction, complacency?
I'd say
liberals staying home.
I think all of the above. I think all of the above, but I think satisfaction being the main one.
A little bit of fatigue too, having come out of a round of municipal elections, all the federal election speculation here, and the U.S. election. I think people were just a little fatigued by it all.
And another piece that likely played a role was the fact that with the pending at the time and now actual Canada Post strike, Elections Nova Scotia did not send out the voter identification cards, right? Those VIC cards. So that, that is oftentimes an important reminder for people on the day of. And we certainly did all we could do to encourage and, showcase how people could vote. But I think that collectively all of those things played a role.
Right.
And the funny part is people tried to blame us for somehow the Canada Post strike, that somehow we knew that was going to happen. We're not that smart, because there was a direct mail piece that we sent out during the campaign, which is still sitting in a Canada Post office in like Montreal. So it wasn't like it was something we were counting on, or else we wouldn't have wasted the money on that direct mail that will be coming to people in a couple of ridings over the next, whenever the strike is settled. They'll be wondering what that is.
Cameron, when I am having trouble getting to sleep at night, I try to console myself with the notion that it's better to be lucky than smart.
I would agree with that for sure. Yeah.
Hey, affordability. We alluded to this in the intro. Affordability, this round of inflation, the cost of living, is killing every government in the world. Mm-hmm. Right? And in Canada, certainly we've seen people like Eby and Mo barely scrape by. And we've seen Higgs get rolled right out on a rail. So why did people not blame Tim Houston for the cost of living? And what did you do to try to counteract that issue?
Well, I'll start with the second piece, and you guys can chime in. But again, some of the work to establish credibility on affordability, David, was done before the writ even happened. I mean, a year ago, Premier Houston announced a school lunch program for all children across the province, and that's a material piece in terms of helping families with affordability issues. So that was already in the works. And then, of course, through the campaign...
Trudeau's announced one of those too, though, and I don't see a big bounce in his numbers.
But it speaks again to people's trust in Premier Houston and his credibility. I mean, I know I keep saying that, but I really do think that speaks a lot to how he has interacted and earned that trust with voters. And then through the campaign, our three main bullets were, more doctors, higher wages, and lower taxes. So we had specific platform pieces, increase in the minimum wage, increase in the personal exemption tax amount by $3,000, and some other things, right? So there were, things that we tried to do. And as Premier Houston would say, like, government can't do everything, but when they can, they should be doing things. And these are the things we're trying to do to make it easier for people.
Right. Cameron, you have any thoughts on this affordability issue?
Well, we're lucky, especially Tara and I, because we're not part of the day-to-day running of the government. We're just sort of campaign people. But like the foundation had been
which is way more fun. Yeah, way more fun. Way more fun. James has the grind and the accountability.
Exactly.
Right? And I bet you Tim Houston's not so nice every day. Last episode, Fidelity Investments Canada shared some data that debunked a myth about young people. They do care about their finances. If you don't recall those statistics, because your head is filled with other numbers, like the $250 working Canadians rebate, a potential 25% tariff on all Canadian goods, or how many points Les Glorieux had in the 1976-77 season. 132, by the way, lost 8 games in the entire season. I don't blame you. So let me just remind you of one of those stats. 6 out of 10 18 to 34-year-old Canadians say they are investing. That's a lot of young people, which is a wonderful thing. But it also means 4 in 10 are not investing, missing out on what Albert Einstein called the eighth wonder of the world, the power of compound interest. Here's a potential fix. According to the 2024 Fidelity Young Canadian study by Ipsos, the most common way to start investing is by talking to a family member. So this holiday season, when you're gathered with loved ones, and whether it's your kids, a younger nephew or cousin, talk to them about investing. You might be the catalyst to them getting financial advice and investing. And they might thank you 10, 20, 30 years from now, because compounding matters and investment performance matters.
The Premier had established a brand already on these issues, which people liked and people could get behind. So as campaign people, Tara and I, we didn't have to, reinvent the wheel. It had already been put in process by, the Premier and the people that actually do the work day to day. And so it was kind of easy for us in a way. Still, it was still hard in some levels, but they'd already set the table for us, and we just had to keep it going for another, for the 30 days of the campaign. And if we did that, okay, but we were given a good hand to start out with.
All right. Well, since I'm a Liberal, you'll indulge me with a little analysis of the Liberal Party, if you would. Yeah. James, yeah. You're the data guy.
Yeah.
Where did Stephen McNeil's vote go?
Well, I think it started back in 2021. The rural male voters are sort of the deciding factor in Nova Scotia. Like, you can't win with just those, but you sort of can't win without them. And I think that vote came our way in 2021, which what initially pushed us over the top. And for the most part, what happened in 2024 was, as that vote went away, but as Cameron pointed out earlier, they still had more of the raw vote than the NDP did. A lot of it came our way, particularly in suburban HRM, which had been sort of the last bastion of strength for the Liberals. And then we just picked up the few places left in rural Nova Scotia that we didn't already hold.
So tell me why that has happened. Is it that Houston has a unique appeal to those voters? Is it that the provincial Liberal offering is different under Churchill than it was under McNeil? Or is it Trudeau?
It's probably a piece of all of those. I do think that Premier Houston does have a bit of a unique relationship with Nova Scotians. I think Zach Churchill was sort of seen as the last vestige of that McNeil government that Nova Scotians had sort of decided they were ready to move on from in 2021. And you can't deny that the Prime Minister's not particularly, though he remains probably more popular in Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada than he does in much of the country. There was still some dissatisfaction with him that came through.
Cameron and Tara, when you were designing the campaign, what were you thinking about the Liberal Party and how to deal with it?
Well, they were our focus, to be clear. Liberal Party was our focus. And we really were designing a campaign, which frankly, for the entire 30 days was primarily still our focus. There was talk about us switching to the NDP. No, we were totally focused on the Liberals, and that's the one thing that I think as a campaign.
If you were ever going to lose, you would lose to them.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Or even lose seats in any substantial, it'd be to them. And that's one thing I think as a campaign, we take a great deal of pride is that Liberal vote went down and we got it all. We literally, you just look at it, they went down, the margin they went down, we went up. So the NDP were able to in sort of a pockets, but it wasn't like they still managed to finish ahead of the NDP, but we finished 30 points ahead of both of them. So that's something that I think that our strategy and I would still think even in the next election, obviously the NDP or the opposition, but I mean, I think that it'll be interesting next time as to which one of them, is quote unquote the heir apparent, because they both have some problems certainly going forward.
Tara, what would you say about that? The Liberals have 2 seats. They're not the official opposition, but they did get the second most votes. Are the Liberals in trouble in Nova Scotia, or are they just a new leader and Trudeau gone away from being competitive again?
I think it's a time of reflection, deep reflection for them. There was a post-campaign report done by their party after 2021 about some of the issues within the organization. And I see those things are still being addressed. And, obviously, it's got to be pretty devastating for them, of stating the obvious. And so a time for them to really regroup, rethink, rebrand, refocus for the next election. And certainly, obviously, with a new leader, they've some work to do for sure.
Right.
I think part of the problem with the Liberal Party was, even though actually Tara referred to the report, she was a friend of mine from Acadia, Maura Ryan and Jim Cowan were the ones that did it. But there was a part of them that thought, okay.
Do you know Jim Cowan, by the way, Cameron?
Oh, he's sort of like, everybody knows everybody in Nova Scotia, right? So Chris McGinnis, who ran McNeil's campaigns, is one of my best friends. So it's very incestuous here and stuff.
I just want to say, Chris is a great guy, but I love Jim Cowan. I just wanted to say that. That's all.
Okay, that's good. No, my dad and Jim Cowan were. My dad, who was a big Tory, said it was a classic line: is when Jim Cowan got appointed to the Senate, my dad goes, "Well, if they're going to appoint a Liberal, Jim Cowan's a darn good one to appoint." And I remember,
that's what Paul Martin thought so too. That's right.
But I think even after they lost 2021, they thought, oh, well, people will just elect us again next time. No problem. We're the national governing party and we'll come back in. And there was the reflection is, no, it's time to renewal. And they just sort of figured they could just run it out again and things would just get better without any real work.
Right. James, did you expect anything out of them that you didn't get? Did you expect a different campaign from them?
I wouldn't say so, and frankly, I don't know. If the shoe had been on the other foot and we were over there, I don't know that we would have or could have done much differently than what they did. I was a little surprised that they decided to steer into the carbon tax a little bit by promoting their own cap and trade program. I don't know how else you would have handled it, but that was a bit of a surprise that they sort of steered themselves right into that maelstrom.
Did you find any environmental vote out there? Did you find any climate vote? Anybody that was demanding of you more robust action on climate? I just can't see it in the polls I'm looking at all.
No, and in fact, there was a piece of legislation here called the Coastal Protection Act that had been passed under Premier Rankin that Premier Houston decided to take a different tact on and decentralize it and make it more local decision making, which had been at the start of the campaign a point that the NDP had tried to push. And we have something like 14,000 kilometers of coastline in Nova Scotia, and a lot of that coastline voted for us. So I just don't think it ever became the issue that they'd hoped it would be.
How nasty is this lobster dispute?
It's pretty bad, I think.
Yeah.
And there's lots of layers to it, and it's been going on for a few years now. And I think it became a real vote driver. I mean, the refrain down on the south and western shore of Nova Scotia was vote before you vote, because they were all going out to dump the traps in the last couple of days of the campaign. Right. It was, I think, a deciding vote, probably from the south shore of Nova Scotia all the way around the Bay of Fundy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a resolution to that? Any of you? Yeah, what's the right answer there?
The fisherman would say enforcement. The fishermen down there, and I don't profess to be an expert on it, living in Peninsula Halifax, but the fishermen that you talk to and the candidates think enforcement is one of the key issues, and they do blame the federal government for not enforcing what's going on, and it almost seems to be like just
on the water.
Exactly. Yep. That does seem to be.
What's that, Tara? I didn't hear that.
Enforcement on the water.
Enforcement on the water.
Yeah.
And some clear rules. Like, I still think there's some confusion around who's fishing and international fishermen coming up and fishing our waters as well.
Right.
I mean, we won Clare this election, which is a riding we hadn't won since 1993. Well, 1993. Was it 1993 or 1998? 88 was the last time we won it, and that's right in the sort of the heart of the issue. And we also won Yarmouth, which was the leaders, which is again sort of right at the center of things. And those are two ridings we hadn't won in a long time. So I do think that certainly played a part.
Right. So, what's the mandate for the government? What do Nova Scotians expect from this government at the conclusion of the campaign?
Sarah, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, they expect the Tim Houston government to continue to do what they said they would do and have been doing, to execute on the plan, to deliver on the campaign promises, and to do more, to do it faster, to stand up for Nova Scotians, regardless of who's in government in Ottawa. He's been very clear about that. You know, he has worked with the federal government on things like wind power, but when it's not in the best interests of Nova Scotians, he will advocate, and people will hear about it. So collectively, that's their mandate moving forward. It's nothing earth-shattering from our perspective. It's all what he's been doing, you know, for the last 3 years and will continue to do.
So, just to help me out here, because I don't get to follow it day to day, would they expect that healthcare would remain the number one focus of the government? Or is that now part of the mix of the government, and the mandate is broader now? What would they be expecting on affordability? More measures, or... I'm asking.
Yeah.
Go ahead, James.
Oh, I think what they'll see is that a lot of the steps that were taken over the first mandate in terms of the healthcare will start to bear fruit. Like, we're still a few years away from graduating folks from that new medical school. But some of the other programs that the Premier has put in place with recruiting and retaining healthcare professionals hopefully will and should start to bear some fruit. We also had a pretty aggressive plan to build more houses. We're 20, 30,000 housing units behind where we need to be, and falling behind a little bit every year. So a lot of that should come.
Halifax is an expensive market now, is it not?
It's a very expensive market.
But we're actually building per capita, like I think leading the country in building houses per capita in the last couple of years. So I mean that, and so there are measures that he's done to allow that to happen. So there has been like I think we're second in the country or first per capita on new housing builds. So there's like dramatic progress going there and stuff like that, which hadn't been happening for quite a long time.
Yeah.
You know, just one thing that's occurring to me is that when the way this whole immigration debate's gone in Canada, it's so funny. One of the things I think about is in 2015, when the federal Liberals held every seat in Atlantic Canada, and the provincial Liberals governed every province in Atlantic Canada. It was obviously a very big opportunity to get things done, whether you liked those things or not. It was a big opportunity to get things done. And I knew the premiers, and I talked to the premiers, and I said, what do you think you should get done with the federal government? And they all talked about immigration. They all talked about growing the populations of the provinces to build up economic vitality, etc. Right? So 10 years on from there, how's that project coming along in Nova Scotia?
I'll go, guys, and you jump in.
Go ahead, Tara.
Premier Houston initially, when he was first elected, spoke about, you know, the vision for Nova Scotia and increased growth and significant growth. But consistent with his, you know, listen, feedback, reflection, it became evident that, the challenges of growth and significant growth needed to be addressed. And so the population growth, we've tipped over 1 million people here in Nova Scotia. But what has happened is a really thoughtful reflection about what do we need to focus our immigration on. And it is twofold, David. It is healthcare workers and tradespeople. So to Cameron, the question about the housing, like the healthcare and housing are the key things in Nova Scotia right now in terms of what we need to build a strong platform with. And that's where our focus in terms of immigration rests, on healthcare workers and tradespeople. And the Premier is unapologetic about that. Like, that's what we need to focus on at this point.
Is that a nice way of telling me that there's been a backlash against a a lot of newcomers to what was not an incredibly diverse population?
No.
No.
It's just what I use it as an example again to illustrate. We make decisions. Premier makes decisions, gets feedback, reflects on what's best for the province and where we need to focus. So he's able to pivot, and that's where that's.
I'm not trying to be judgmental, but it's obvious that social accommodation would be an issue in that kind of a population, right?
Yeah. The interesting part of the election, David, is the Liberals were running against increased immigration. They were actually criticizing the Premier for wanting to grow the population. That was part of one of their, if you could say,
in this election.
They've criticized the Premier continually for allowing more immigration and saying that he's wanting to move too fast on that. So that was sort of like the juxtaposition. Is the Premier was saying, yes, I still want it, but I want it to be focused, and the Liberals were actually criticizing him for moving too fast on it. And so
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and that was something that if you'd say. There were things that the Liberals in the last year talked about. They really tried to criticize us a fair amount on that. And I don't think it really had any effects. I think people figured Tim was sort of at the sweet spot on it, sort of thing.
So from a social unity point of view, you'd say the immigration experiment's going well in Nova Scotia?
Yep. I said people, the thing is, it's happened so quickly that we're a little behind in infrastructure and stuff that probably should have done 10 years ago. But I think people are engaging. It's just, the pressures that everybody all across the country is on, infrastructure and things along those lines.
Right. Okay. Well, let's do a little public service here to wrap up. On the basis of your 2 hugely successful campaigns in a row, to any campaigners across the country that are out there listening, what advice do you have about running a modern campaign?
Do you want us all to go, or?
Yeah, I want you all to go. Just jump in.
Okay. Well, the one thing I'll say, and it will sound corny, but and I include Tara and Mitch in this, but I also include having people you get along with and work well with together. I've been involved in, you see it from sometimes on the outside, but I think especially having, and also, which I think has been a really important process to our campaigns, and Mitch is part of it, but also how we've had great relationships, even with Tara and I, with the actual government, like with Nicola Foss, Chief of Staff, and Sean Jodry, people that are actually in the government and being in sync with them is really, I think, been important, because you're all working together and you're not just for a 30-day campaign, all of a sudden just, what do we do now? You've been able to work together for the last 5 years, and it just makes it easier for you to continue to work together. And I think that's having the 2 of them sort of connected, I think certainly makes it a heck of a lot easier. Yeah,
for sure. That's been my experience, 100%.
Yeah.
Tara, what do you think?
Absolutely. And I echo what Cameron said, 2021, 2024, we had just fabulous teams of people in that war room that worked so well together. It's top shelf talent, a real team effort. Everybody gave everything every day for the benefit of Nova Scotia. The other piece I'd say that's not a team piece, it's more about reflection of modern campaign, is the ability to be able to produce and distribute your own product, your own content from a social media perspective, and to do that quick, to do that creatively, to do that, spend the money on it, because that is where it's, as we talked about earlier, in this day and age of, the traditional media not really doing what they would have done in the past with the Leaders Tour. That's the way to access people, for sure.
If I could interrupt just for 1 second, one of the classic moments of the campaign was where the veterans weren't allowed to go into Sackville Heights Elementary School in their uniforms. And literally that story was changed through social media and the Premier's reaction. That was a case where, 20 years ago, someone might want to leak the story to the Herald, but literally that there was a reversal done on that an hour due to the efforts done by our digital team and our social media team and our comms team, like Lisa Maniger. That was stuff that, you wouldn't have been able to do 20 years ago, but we were able to actually get that changed before Remembrance Day in a period of 2 to 3 hours without traditional media even being involved.
But with everybody knowing about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
James, you got any lessons, campaign lessons to teach us?
Well, I think you've talked about it on previous episodes. paid media and social media is really now how you talk to voters. Earned media is becoming decreasingly influential in how. But we've also found like we were out of earned media for a couple of days and we saw a hit. So you still kind of have to be in that game. But from a ground game perspective, again, it's harder and harder with fewer volunteers. You do have to professionalize that. And I had a great team with Adam Smith and Brendan Nickel helping me out, that we were able to draw on some resources from across the country, really folks who came in to help us out. And professionalizing that effort really was, I think, allowed us to overcome, voter turnout was down. Our vote went up by over 20,000 votes. And I credit a lot to our ability to ID that vote and get it to the polls.
Okay, because I just want to take you on this, because Corey and I had a disagreement about this on the Curse of Politics after the U.S. election, in which the Democrats have a massive, union-driven get-out-the-vote operation, and the Trump campaign, subcontracted that out to Elon Musk, to whatever happened, right? And the Democrats were the ones with the turnout problem. Yeah. So my view has always been, always been, that get-out-the-vote operations are important only in the most marginal of circumstances, only in the handful of ridings that are going to fall within hundreds of votes one way or another. Yeah. Right? And in the vast majority of the ridings, GOTV is irrelevant. The NDP can sweep Quebec in 2011 without a single volunteer or identified vote in the whole province, if the mood's behind you. Mm-hmm. So where do you, at the end of the day, when you made a decision, which is to spend a lot of resources on get out the vote. How do you think the campaign might have gone if you'd spent that money on advertising instead?
I think I got to interrupt Mitch there because he's probably not going to take as much credit for this as he deserves. In 2021, our majority would have been a minority if we didn't win in the last about 4 or 5 ridings that called in the advance vote. We literally probably would have won 26, 27 seats. 4 or 5 ridings came in that gave us a majority in 2021. And that was because of voter ID, GOTV doing a better job of it than your competitors. Obviously, I totally agree with you, the tone, and you carry ridings over by maybe your advertising and stuff like that. But I mean, you look at the ridings that Yarmouth, we won by like 12 votes, in Annapolis, right? So I mean, but especially in 2021, if we didn't have that, we would have been a minority government as opposed to a majority government. And I think that's where, you're right about the margins, but the margins could be a big difference as to what the overall outcome is.
Yeah. I mean, we had a unique situation here where the riding that had our highest vote margin and the riding that had our narrowest vote margin were neighboring ridings. And if we didn't have sort of a global GOTV effort, I don't know that we pick up that one seat we won by 7 votes. If we don't put all of that effort into getting the advance vote out in Yarmouth and Argyle and Digby and Annapolis, so that those votes are in the box before the fishermen go and dump their traps, I don't know that we win those ridings. The ones here in the city where we put a heavy GOTV and voter ID effort in suburban, all for the most part, with one exception, came our way. So yeah. In a riding where you're going to rack up 75% of the vote, GOTV probably isn't what pushed you over. But in the ridings where it is 100 votes, where it is a dozen votes, and people like to go afterwards and say whose polling was the most accurate. And when we exceed the polling by 2 or 3 points, I think those 2 or 3 points are the GOTV effort where we get our vote in the box that might not otherwise have been there.
I'll mark you down as Team Corey on that one then, James. All right, you guys. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks,
Tara, Cameron, James, great conversation. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsors, CN Rail and Fidelity Investments. I want to thank all the Herle Burly-ites who watch or listen to this program. You got a great lesson in expert campaign management today. I want to thank our 3 participants so much for joining me and sharing openly sharing their lessons from this campaign. One last round of congratulations, you 3. Great accomplishment, and you should take real pride in what you've done, and thanks for your contribution to public life in the country. Appreciate all of the fact that you take time out of your lives to do this.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Enjoy the show.
God bless. See you on the trail.
Say goodbye.
Hurly burly, hurly burly.